Superintendent of Schools in Fitchburg. I'm here to provide you an update on the preliminary reopening plan for Fitchburg so far. Over the last couple months, we've been busy surveying parents. We received nearly 1,400 parental responses to a survey that was sent out to approximately 3,300 parents. We have been engaging stakeholders within the community. Tonight's Zoom event is another one of those events. We are required to review 3 different options for the reopening of school for our August 31 scheduled date. Those options are remote, as we had in the spring, although remote would probably look a little different, a full in-person option, and then a hybrid, which would be a combination of in-person and remote learning. Lastly, information on reopening schools happens daily and sometimes hourly. We have received additional guidance within the last 24 hours, and that information has been included into this presentation to the community. I should let everyone know that for this presentation and for the time being, in Fitchburg and many other communities, we are still waiting for additional information. We may not have answers to all the questions that you have, and we will try to do the best to share with you tonight all the information that we do have. Over the last month, we've been performing a feasibility study of our school operations. This involves all the logistics associated with operating a school, from school buildings to transportations to meals, to how students enter and exit the buildings and how students move within the buildings, and also even student use of bathrooms and how many students can enter and exit the bathrooms at a specific time given the recent guidance. Again, we're required to look at 3 options: in-person, hybrid, which is a combination of in-person and then remote, which was the model that we were forced to go to as a result of the COVID-19 emergency back in March. As part of this as all of these options, we are looking at what the schedules will be with regards to start dates, hours, and also one of the main factors as we go through this presentation has been a focus on all our students, including our high needs students. Again, before we go further, this information is preliminary. We do not have all the answers. As I mentioned earlier, there are many unknowns as I speak with you tonight. One of the biggest unknown items for Fitchburg and communities across Massachusetts are the budget. We have not been provided a school budget number from the State Department of Elementary Education. Given the COVID-19 impact on state budgets, Massachusetts has not yet released any information to local districts with regards to what amount of funding may be available this year. You may also be following the news or the stimulus conversations happening in Washington. We do not know at this time what, if any, funding will be approved for schools and what strings may be carried along with those fundings, meaning the conditions that the funding would be available to Fitchburg. We continue to receive guidance and from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, along with any health advisories from Mass Department of Public Health or our local boards of health. We are reviewing all of those and reviewing the impact on our school operations for staff, students, and families. Lastly, the schools were closed back in March as a result of Governor Baker's statewide announcement. Massachusetts has been successful in reducing the rate of COVID infections, where in the spring, Massachusetts.
Where's your thing?
Thank you. Have a good one. Please mute your phones.
I just ask everybody to please mute your phones. Everyone in Massachusetts has been part of the success of reducing the infection rate in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is now one of the 4 states with the lowest infection rate in the country. Again, as we go through this update with you tonight, there are negotiations that still need to happen with either the unions that are employed by Fitchburg Public Schools, and also there are outside contracts, including our busing contract that may need to be considered.
I don't care. She wants to go into the trees.
Right.
Please mute your phones or computers.
Here you go. You can have it.
Thank you. Where are we at now, and what do we need to accomplish over the next month? So by the 31st of July, we're required to submit a plan to the Department of Education in Massachusetts covering the 3 options, as I've already mentioned. 1, can we do a return in person to school at the reopening? 2, can we or will we reopen under a remote learning model? Or 3, will we reopen in a combination of remote learning and in person? The number sequence, which I just described, those options do not represent any preference or decisions being made. We have yet to make a final decision on what the preliminary plan will be submitted to the Department of Elementary Ed. The next date that's key on our calendar is August 10th. By that date, we and other districts across Massachusetts are required to submit a more detailed plan to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. I want to let everybody know that with assistance from the Bar Foundation, we've retained a consultant to help us prepare our preliminary plan, and that assistance has been extremely helpful. Getting back to the timeline and the original schedule that we had for the upcoming school year, we originally planned to have staff training begin on August 26th and school to reopen on August 31st. Last night, myself and superintendents across the Commonwealth received a copy of a memorandum of understanding or an agreement between the Mass Teachers Association and the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. In that agreement, the number of school days for students would be decreased from 180 to 170, and the first 10 days of the school year would involve professional development and health and safety training to staff. As I mentioned earlier, the calendar is one item that we will be discussing with our school committee and with our unions, and more details in terms of when the reopening date will be, how the schedule will be, or the calendar will be impacted, still needs to be determined. As soon as we have that information, we will share it with the community. As part of our feasibility study, we've looked at the number of students that we can accommodate under 2 settings. The first setting being the 3-foot social distancing recommendation from the World Health Organization if all students and staff wear masks. The second scenario is 6 feet of social distancing. To try to make the understanding easier and color coding for viewers, green represents that it is possible, red represents that it is not possible. So under a 3-foot scenario, when you look at the numbers in that column versus the current enrollment, you can see that we have adequate capacity in our schools. I should be clear that the 3-foot and 6-foot distancing represents the distance between the seats at desks. So under the 3-foot scenario, we would be able to accommodate all students except those at Fitchburg High School. Under a 6-foot social distancing requirement, we would only be able to accommodate the students at Goodrich Academy, and the respective shortfall when compared to the year-ending enrollment at each of those schools is in the far right-hand column. As you can see, we would really need to look at the capacity shortfall at Memorial and Rheingold Elementary School. The next 2 slides in tonight's presentation show pictorially what 3-foot spacing looks like and what 6-foot spacing looks like. As you can see, we're able to accommodate far less students per classroom under a 6-foot spacing scenario. Continuing along the facilities logistics and really moving into the area of lunch is the state requirements and guidance for eating in the cafeteria require 6 feet of social distancing for eating. As just reviewed in the 2 previous slides, if we were able to have students return with 3 feet of social distancing, we would have to make sure that if there was not sufficient space in the cafeteria, that we would have to find space for roughly half of the students in those classes to eat lunch. As you can see, we do experience many classrooms that are too small to have 6 feet of social distancing with all students returning at this present time. As mentioned earlier, the bathrooms typically allow for multiple students, but under the current guidelines are single use, so 1 student at a time in the bathroom. Fitchburg, like many other districts across the Commonwealth, have schools that were built decades ago. Our average age of school facility is in the 60-year range. Lastly, one of the logistics that we've been reviewing is the travel between classrooms by students while trying to observe social distancing recommendations. Another key factor to review and discuss as we consider the 3 reopening options is transportation. This slide summarizes the responses from the parental survey, where we had nearly 1,500 responses out of the 3,300 responses. So in a fully in-person or hybrid model, what would you do to plan to utilize for transportation? So nearly 45% of respondents stated that they would drive the child to and from school every day. 21% would do a combination of parent pickup or drop off or bus. There would be an alternating schedule. Only 25% said that they would take the bus every day, with nearly 75 or 65% of respondents describing some level a parental pickup or drop off. That will put stress on the student start and dismissal flow. This slide shows a pictorial representation of how many students or how the students will be able to sit on a yellow bus. And these pictures show how the students have to alternate between aisle and window per the state guidelines that were issued last week. So what does that mean for Fitchburg? For our yellow buses, which are 71 passenger buses, we can accommodate 23 passengers. Now, there's a allowance in the guidance that students who could sit together if from the same household. So that number might be a little bit higher, but at a starting point, our capacity starts at about 32% of normal. We have two transportation providers in Fitchburg. One is First Student, which is the big yellow bus. And second, we have Vanpool, who provides transportation to students under an individual educational plan. Transporting students in those vehicles, which are different and smaller, are shown in example A, where 4 students can ride in a van along with a driver and a monitor. So in summary on transportation by parents, looking at the response rate from the parental survey in terms of how many will be dropped off and picked up by parents, we could face 3,600 students being picked up or dropped off. Out of 5,500, that's approximately 60% of our students being delivered and picked up at school by parents. Our schools are largely in neighborhoods that it would be difficult to accommodate that volume of traffic. And there would be an impact during those times in the morning and in the afternoon, potentially under those scenarios. Going back to the parental survey, one of the questions was, what would be your first choice for school to reopen this fall? And the response rates are as follows. So under a remote model, nearly 44% of respondents selected remote as their first priority. Hybrid, which would be a combination of in-person and remote, was the second largest selection with a little over 31%. And lastly, 1/4 of respondents had a preference for returning to school in person when school reopens.
Oh,
So,
damn it.
first and foremost, our focus is on the health of students, staffs, and families, whether it be in person, hybrid, or remote. We're looking into procuring personal protective equipment, or PPE has been commonly referred to in the news, will be required of all staff and students. We will be following all the DESE, the CDC, DPH guidelines for suspected COVID-19 cases, and looking at the different areas and protocols for entering and exiting the buildings, along with, we must create isolation areas for students who are suspected of showing COVID-19 symptoms. Lastly, we have investigated potential additional space options for 3-foot and 6-foot in-person models. We have not made any decisions, and that, our ability to retain additional space is partly or largely a function of if there is adequate funding available to do that. We will be following cleaning and disinfecting protocols as provided to us by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And one factor that we're looking at one model is to have students spend the day in one classroom as a cohort of students, and teachers travel between them to limit the amount of in-person travel in the hallway, and also mainly to minimize the potential contact or spread of anyone suspected of having COVID-19. Moving on, I'm going to next present 2 sample hybrid learning models. These models are samples and are by no means any final decisions. As mentioned earlier, we still have conversations and negotiations to have with our unions. But what I want to present to you now are 2 options. Under option 1, we have 4 cohorts. We haven't yet decided how the cohorts will be created for A and B, But just as a hypothetical example, students in cohort A would be have the last name start with letter A through L, and cohort B would be M through Z. We would make an accommodation for students in each cohort with siblings to attend also at the same time. Cohort C would be our high needs students who would attend school every day that we have here, which would be in this option Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then alternating in the afternoons when cohort A is in school, in person, cohort B would have remote learning sessions synchronously. Lastly, there's a cohort D for families who, for health reasons or safety reasons or otherwise, would select a remote learning option. And for that cohort, all their learning would be remotely. In this model, we have 2 days of school at the beginning of the week. Wednesday, which breaks up the week, provides teacher preparation, common planning time, some remote sessions with each cohort, potentially individual conferences. And then Thursday and Friday, we flip the cohort A and B. B goes to school in person in the morning. Cohort A performs remote learning in the afternoon. Another option that we're considering and that is being looked at is where we have students, cohorts A and B. Again, it could be last names. Again, we haven't made that decision yet at this time. But cohort A comes the A week, and then cohort B comes to school in person on the B week. So A and B, instead of flipping 2 days in 1 week, they go to school 4 days in a week and are remote 4 days in a week. Cohort C, our high need students, again, are in person in school each day that we hold classes in school. And again, cohort D is remote each of the days. For remote learning for the opening of school this year, we're going to build upon the successes we achieved from the spring and look back, reflect, and learn on some of the challenges we faced in the spring. We went to the remote learning model out of a state of emergency and necessity. We in Fitchburg, like school districts across the country, learned a lot during that time period. And if this is a model that we will be pursuing, whether it be on a small scale or large scale, it will be better than what we had before based on our learnings. We'll also be looking to ensure that 100% of our students and families have access to devices and internet access for the upcoming school year. We'll look at the platforms that were successful for remote learning and expand our tools to make remote learning more robust for all students. We will be providing significant social emotional learning instruction and support for both staff and students. With remote learning this year, there will be an attendance requirement and a grading policy, but at this time, those have not yet been created. Lastly, by August 10th, we need to submit a reopening plan, and we'll be going into greater detail on to what extent we will be providing a remote model. But there will be parents who will be selecting a remote model regardless of us returning in either an in-person or a hybrid, and we'll be making an accommodation for those parents. Regardless of the three models that I've described so far, the following will continue. One is the after-school programming under the 21st Century Program. Second, the remote learning option, as I just described, whether it be in Fitchburg or any community in Massachusetts. We're all planning to offer a remote learning option to parents. We'll be providing support during the day to parents from whether it be remote learning or otherwise. As I mentioned earlier, the social and emotional learning needs of our students will be a high priority, especially this year. We will continue to provide services to our special education students and providing services to our English language learning students. And lastly, the collaboration with our outside agencies, we will continue them and look to make them better and stronger for the upcoming year. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining this Zoom call. As I look at the number of participants, we have about 221 people attending tonight's presentation. I want to thank you for your time. As I mentioned earlier, we don't have all the answers. This is still a work in process. No decisions have been made yet. There are negotiations that still and conversations that still need to take place with our staff. We're incorporating the feedback that we received from tonight's forum, this morning's forum, and we have another one scheduled tomorrow morning for 11. And we will be having separately an update just for staff only tomorrow afternoon and a school committee meeting tomorrow. So as I understood from the opening provided earlier, we are leaving the chat room open for an additional 10 minutes to gather your input, comments, and questions on tonight's presentation. So in closing, I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. I know I appreciate everybody's patience and understanding, and as soon as we have information, we will provide that to you. Thank you.
Okay. Think of what they talk and let me know.
I don't get the hybrid model. I really don't. Get like that's the other thing. Like I don't get. That's the only thing.
What don't you get?
I don't get the hybrid.
Hello?
The hybrid is you do some at home, some in school, or they alternate days at school.
Okay. So like how we're gonna like schedule it? It's gonna be like I know Wednesdays what I heard was like Wednesdays like a day off for like everything for teachers to like plan and everything. Like I don't get the schedule for it too. That's the one thing like I don't like fully understand.
Host is still there. Host, stop muting me. I'm not going to interrupt.
So you so
but it was like
Will the high school be remote? Any questions?
someone keeps muting me. So did you understand what I was talking about?
like the no, I understand what the hybrid model means, like 50% of what's it called? 50% of school and 50% of when doing remote, but I don't get the schedule of it.
Well, it's not set in stone yet. He was just giving you an example. If it
Host disabled attendees chat. We'll stop it.
Are any of the questions actually going to be answered because the chat has been disabled?
Great question.
Yes.
I was also wondering.
So if you go to the link for the feedback form, there's an area for additional questions.
Thank you.
So no questions will be answered during the meeting?
We have answered some, and we'll continue to try and answer some as well.
Where do we find the feedback form?
You gotta scroll up to the top.
We'll add it into the chat box again.
The chat has been disabled, so we won't be able to access it until it's enabled.
It's the K-12, but is it the contact us at fitchburg.us?
Not at that one. If you scroll all the way to the top.
It just got added at the end. You can see, you can still scroll.
I don't feel like anything was answered. I just feel like we were just fed a bunch of information, but there's still nothing. Everything is still in the air. So it was just a waste of time, honestly, after working all day.
This is telling me the survey is closed.
I'm confused about the 3 feet and the 6 feet. Everywhere you talk to everybody, it's supposed to be 6 feet, and the school says 3 feet is sufficient. That doesn't make any sense. Did everybody leave?
I don't think we're getting answers during this meeting. We got that link to fill out the survey to then maybe get our questions answered later in life.